So far in our unit on trans-regional empires before 1600, we've learned about how the Abbasid Caliphate, the Mongols, and the Ottomans have gained, consolidated, and maintained their power. We have yet to learn much about the major powerhouse of the pre-industrial world, though, and that's China. So today, we're going to dive deep into the Middle Kingdom of dynastic China. As you probably already guessed from our unit on the growth of trans-regional trade, China's prominence economically had given them some power, but their political system also kept them stable. So let's talk about how that worked. Chinese civilization as we know it stabilized around the same time as the Roman Empire was ruling over United Europe in the ancient world. But whereas Europe fell apart into 1,000 years of dark ages after the collapse of ancient Rome, China managed to pull itself together. So how did they do this? Chinese culture is dominated by a belief system known as Confucianism. Confucianism was founded by a man named Confucius, who was convinced that people were inherently good, but needed education and a firm understanding of their place in the world to be their best selves. This place in society was defined by a series of relationships, those that you can see here, and these relationships and hierarchies mimic the family structure at every level and emphasize respect and obedience to your elders and your betters. In this chart here, you can see who are considered the betters or the elders to whom we owe that respect and obedience. So if the emperor was seen as the head of China and the rest of the people were his family, that meant that people had to respect and obey the emperor like they would respect and obey their parents. This respect and obedience was ratcheted up almost to where it was like worship. This idea was called filial piety. Piety looking at worship, and filial meaning like a son to a parent. So essentially, those below you, be they your children, or if you're the emperor, your subjects, look up to you and worship your requests and your status. This emphasis on respect and obedience made China very, very stable, which during the Sung Dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1279, helped create an economic and political golden age. China's economy during this period grew, and they were producing porcelain, silk, and gunpowder and trading them all over the world, as we learned about last unit. They developed the innovations of paper money and the compass that were so important to Silk Road trade. They also were the first to use the printing press. Their cities, like we can see here, reached populations of up to 1 million people, and their government was staffed by professionals, those who had to take exams in order to prove that they were capable of their work, right? So these exams, you can see a painting here of people coming in to take the exams. They were called civil service. Civil service basically means that they are professional government workers. So they are, here you go, you can see that better. They are called bureaucrats, right? And bureaucrats staff a professionalized government called a, bureaucracy. So, why did this benefit them? Because they had a professional class of government workers, they were able to grow prosperous and stable. It also meant that young men could study and become officials regardless of what their family's social status was. This was a really big deal at the time. All of this success, though, attracted the Mongols. And in 1279, the grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, who you can see here, conquered the Sung Dynasty in China and started his own family of rulers known as the Yuan Dynasty. And the Yuan Dynasty lasts from 1279 to 1368. The Mongols attempted to adapt some of what made Sung China so successful, but they suspended the civil service exams and employed their own government workers from around the empire, which over time made the Chinese people suspicious of them and resentful of being ruled by foreigners. In the mid-1300s, right, leading up to the year that it ends of 1368, the Chinese people were fed up with the rule of the foreign Mongols, and a rebel army overthrew them and reinstituted Chinese rule over China. calling their new dynasty or ruling family the Ming, which means brilliant. They immediately tried to get China back to its pre-Mongol glory. One way that they did this was to fund a fleet, an armada essentially, of giant treasure ships to sail around the Indian Ocean, stopping in ports and showing off how amazing and powerful China was. They would basically wow the states and kingdoms around the Indian Ocean trade route into swearing that China was their better and offering them tribute, like gold, goods, or even fancy animals like giraffes. You can see a giraffe kind of in the background of this image here. I kind of drew right through Zheng He there. These voyages were led by a famous admiral named Zheng He, who'd grown up in a relatively unimpressive situation. He was also a Muslim, which was unique at the time, who was then luckily chosen to be the companion of a young man who would grow up to be the next emperor. Zheng He's voyages worked to reestablish the might and reputation of China after they were ruled by the Mongols. After about 25 years, though, as Zheng He and his emperor friend started to get older, popular opinion started to turn against the voyages. Threats from the northern nomadic groups reminded the Chinese government way too much about the Mongols, and their outreach to other cultures made a society that was increasingly suspicious of foreign ideas way too nervous. So the voyages were stopped, and Ming China started to focus on internal development. They completed the Great Wall, for example, limiting contact with outsiders. Here's the Great Wall. So you can see, right, it was, there you go. It was finished basically during the Ming Dynasty. Culturally, though, the Ming Dynasty also resuscitated China's reputation. Literature grew again, courtly fancy culture grew again, and the civil service exams for government officials returned. Porcelain and tea manufacturers grew so prominent that Europeans increasingly sought out Chinese goods, inspiring groups like the Portuguese and the British merchants to venture all the way to China to seek them out. And you can see a famous Ming porcelain vase here and some of the famous scroll paintings that took place. Going back to the idea of porcelain, though, I think the fact that we still, to this day, call high-quality porcelain dishes China and have China cabinets, that's really a testament to just how famous the quality of Chinese porcelain was, that 600 years later, it still is ingrained in our culture. Overall, the Ming Dynasty was a time of contradictions for China. While they sought to reinvigorate their reputation and make China the center of world trade again, and also the center of world culture, as you can see here in this painting, they also did little outreach and limited their contact with other cultures because they were, in a sense, traumatized by Mongol rule. In many ways, it was that brilliant dynasty that they wanted to achieve like their name because of the art, the culture, and the economic productivity that returned China to a place of great status amongst the world powers. However, many scholars do argue that their focus on just internal development and their indifference to developments outside of China would set them up for failure during the next dynasty, the Qing dynasty.